Raise some.
Hey, hey, hey. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some cane.
Welcome to the Raising Cane Show. I'm your host, Nate Kane. Tonight, we're diving into the most pressing global developments shaping our world, from the escalating geopolitical tensions and national security threats to groundbreaking scientific discoveries and economic shifts. We have it all covered tonight. It's going to be a very interesting show with a lot of different things. So we'll be getting into geopolitical tensions. We'll explore the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and the hybrid warfare strategies being employed, including recent cyber attacks on Russia's United Russia Party by Ukrainian forces. We'll also discuss the rising tensions in the Middle East and what it means for global stability. On the national security front, we're going to delve into the strained U.S.-China relations, with the Biden administration considering additional sanctions on Chinese tech firms accused of espionage, plus highlights from the NATO summit in Brussels, focusing on bolstering defenses in Eastern Europe and supporting Ukraine. Cybersecurity, we're going to cover the latest in cyber threats, including the massive ransomware attack targeting European companies and how AI advancements are revolutionizing cyber defense strategies. We'll analyze the persistent U.S. inflation and Federal Reserve's potential interest rate hikes and surprising economic slowdown in China and the government's new stimulus measures, and the robust economic growth in Central Europe, particularly in Poland and Romania. There's also some interesting stuff going on in the world of science, in particularly the James Webb Space Telescope and some new revelations that have come from that. And then also, there's also some latest things that have popped up in the news about CRISPR, which is a software that is paving the way for treating certain genetic disorders. So we're going to talk about these things, and tonight's going to be a little different than our usual show. Normally, I have a guest on. Tonight, I don't. So I want to open up an opportunity for comments and questions, and we'll get into some interesting things. So I will be kind of checking the comments as we're going. But prepare to be informed, challenged, and inspired as we navigate these complex topics. This is the Raising Cane Show, where we stand at the front lines of truth and liberty. So, folks, I guess the first topic that we're going to get into here is going to be we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and what has been happening. So apparently the Ukrainian forces have launched cyber attacks against Russia's United Russian Party, targeting their servers and websites, reflecting the hybrid warfare strategies being employed in the conflict. This is kind of interesting. Look, a lot of people don't remember that when Russia invaded the Ukraine, there was a massive cyber attack that started it. And it brought down a lot of their defense capabilities. It brought down a lot of their oversight, if you will, or their intelligence gathering systems. There was a lot that was done, and this is really becoming a cyber warfare, as we call it, is becoming a massive part of the overall warfare strategy. When I was working for NSA as part of Mar4 Cyber, they had just changed by that point. They had just changed over to add cyber warfare as a domain of warfare, meaning, we have naval forces, we've got Marine forces, we have Air Force, we've got land forces with the Army. We now have Space Force, but they also had cyber warfare, was a warfare domain. So it was actually something that we considered to be extremely important in our strategy and in our planning. And this is an area that actually I have quite a bit of knowledge in and background in, because most of my career has been working for the Defense Department. I had a short stint with the FBI, which many of you, of course, know. But the majority of my career was with the Navy. I also was an Army soldier, so I'm a U.S. Army veteran. But I also was a Marine civilian and a Navy civilian. So that the bulk of my career really working with the Navy. And we took this very seriously. Mar4 Cyber, I was part of what was called a cyber protection team. And in those cases, what we were looking at was our national critical infrastructure, because we realized a long time ago that if we end up being attacked by an enemy, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to launch a cyber attack, and basically try to bring down as many components as they can that would really hamstring us at the beginning of a war. The national critical infrastructure is a big part of that. Obviously, military assets are something that they target, but as you can see, you now have in the case of Ukraine, and they're launching attacks on Russia. They're going after Russia's United Russia Party. They're trying to take down their servers and their websites, and that's something that I think is really something that we're going to see more of with these conflicts around the world, especially as you have now a lot of these countries that might be considered third world or even second world countries are really scaling up in this area of cyber infrastructure, if you will. Here's something to think about, and this is a lot of people don't consider this when they're thinking about these different countries around the world and where they stand on the stage of cyber warfare capabilities. A country may not have the ability to buy a bunch of tanks and a bunch of planes and have a massive naval fleet, because maybe they don't have the GDP for it. But money is really not an issue when it comes to cyber warfare. In fact, most people don't know this, but Eastern Europe has some of the best IT infrastructure in the world, including some of the best and highest speed internet. And the reason why was because it wasn't put in 50 years ago. It was only put in recently. So it's got a lot of the newer capabilities and newer stuff, and the speeds are faster. And this is one of the reasons why most of the malware and those types of criminal organization attacks are coming out of Eastern Europe. And so when we think about a lot of these smaller countries, I would imagine that cyber warfare is going to be a larger portion of the total attack domain, because they may not have the money to spend on some of these other things. I'm looking to one of the things that I'm also concerned about, of course, is our U.S.-China relations. There's a story out that the Biden administration is considering additional sanctions on the Chinese tech companies. I say a day late and a dollar short, but I have doubts about anything that the Biden administration is going to do against China. I mean, the Biden family themselves have profited largely off of these back alley deals with Hunter Biden and China. So I do think that anything that they're making statements about, I don't really hold that they're going to do a whole lot. We do know that if Trump gets in there, he is going to do something, and we will expect to see. We definitely would expect to see these types of sanctions and things used by Trump as a means of being able to get better trade deals and things like that. But what he's making this claim about, or that what he's talking about really here is, putting additional sanctions on Chinese tech companies that are accused of espionage and intellectual property theft. And this is a huge problem. It's not just a problem in terms of China hacking into, say, American cleared contractors and stealing the plans, for our latest jet airplane, which they did. It's not just that sort of thing, but it's also there's a lot of American companies that are in China and they are wanting to break into the Chinese markets, and this is a real problem for companies that believe in intellectual property, because you've got the Chinese government, which has something that they've deployed or implemented called the 1,000 Grains of Sand program. And what this is it basically allows for, or it doesn't allow for, it basically requires that all Chinese companies must collect intelligence for the Chinese government. This is why China was listed as one of 5 adversarial nations, to where we are not allowed to have any Chinese supply chain in software or hardware products that are sold to U.S. companies who provide these services and systems to U.S. Critical infrastructure. So it begs the question, how many companies do we have in America that are outsourcing software development to China but aren't telling anyone, because it is much cheaper to do that kind of work in China? Well, this is also a problem for companies that have, like iPhone, for example. They want to do work in China. So China says, well, you have to build, you have to make a factory here where you're going to make your phones. Well, that gives access, to the Chinese nationals that are working at that company. And it is a real problem, because they're able to steal intellectual property and have the inner working knowledge of trade secrets of that company. Here's just a thought. I would ask anybody right now that's watching this show, if you were to take your laptop and you were to flip it upside down and just look at the bottom of it and look and see where your laptop was made, I almost guarantee you that 99% of probably everybody listening right now, their laptop was made in China. That means every component in there, and quite honestly, even Microsoft, a lot of their software development is made by Chinese nationals here in the U.S. So this is a real problem, not just over in China, but also here. So this is why when I see things like this, where the Biden administration is saying, we're going to consider additional sanctions on Chinese tech companies, I just don't buy it. We have so many other big issues that are going on, that are happening right here, that I really do think that there are better ways that we can handle some of these things. Number one, what about all these H-1B visas? If you go and you do a search for HB1 visas, which are the visas for people with degrees and things like that, where they're bringing people here to the United States from different places, you have the top 3 companies involved in bringing people over here who are Chinese nationals. And so they're brought here with what's called an HB1 visa from China. And the number 1 company is Microsoft. Number 2 is Google, and number 3 is Oracle, which Oracle, of course, makes a lot of the Linux software. So that means that we've got Chinese nationals who are obligated by the laws of the land they're from, by the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China. They're obligated to spy on these American companies and to steal information. Why would we allow any HB1 visas from China? So that's right there. That is a critical vulnerability that we need to address. Also, the issue of outsourcing software development. There's already laws on the books right now that say that you cannot have those Chinese developers developing software that is going to be sold to American national critical infrastructure. But how do they enforce this? Number one, and do we have a unit with the FBI or with the U.S. I guess it'd be the U.S. Trade Commission or whatever, that is monitoring companies that are having basically outsourcing software development to some of these adversarial countries. And the truth is, while the program's a great idea that we need to stop this sort of thing, it's not foolproof. And in fact, I would say it's not done very well at all. So this is a big problem as well. Um, intellectual property theft, is another problem. Like I said, they're stealing this stuff, and then they'll make like a knockoff, right? They'll make their own version of it, and sell that in the Chinese market. So maybe these companies need to think twice about whether or not they really want to do business in China if China is not going to. Not only is China not enforcing international standards when it comes to intellectual property, but they are actually encouraging or demanding or requiring their companies or their people to steal this information and to commit espionage. So I think these are things for some of these big corporations to think about, and certainly what I think our government can do is they can say, look, if you sell your product in China and you develop it in China, you will not use it in our government. Period. They need to tell Microsoft, we're not going to allow you to have your operating system software on our computers in our government facilities unless it is assured that it's being developed 100% by American citizens and allies. We can't have companies or countries like China involved in the development. So, because they're getting basically firsthand knowledge of the vulnerabilities and where to attack. So that is really, I think the big issue that's going on. Obviously, it's heightening tensions between the U.S. and China, but I'm not so much worried about that. I think that as long as we have the ability to control what we can control, and that's really what we should be doing. NATO summit. So there was a NATO summit in Brussels, which focused on strengthening defenses in Eastern Europe and increasing support for the Ukraine, emphasizing the alliance's strategic priorities. The first thing that sticks out to me in this story is, why in the hell is NATO involved with the Ukraine? The Ukraine is not a NATO ally. They are not we're not under any obligation at all to be involved in this issue going on. So I think that this is a problem. I'm concerned that that NATO receives a lot of money from the U.S. And so my question is what are they doing, and why are we involved there, and why is NATO now sending weapons to the Ukraine to escalate this war with Russia? This makes no sense. If these individual European nations or if these individual nations want to get involved in a proxy war, that's one thing. But I'm of the opinion that there's no legal right for us to be involved there, in terms of the United States or NATO for that matter. And I think this only continues to perpetuate. I understand why there are those, establishment, deep state, if you will, in our government that want to continue this war, that want to continue to prop it up, because this is it's about protecting their little money laundering empire, through the Ukraine. That's my personal opinion. And I do think that it's also there are a lot of what Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex. You have defense contractors that stand to make a lot of money developing these weapons and selling them to the Ukraine. And if the Ukraine can't afford to buy them, well, no problem. Uncle Sam will step in and fund more and more weapons to be sent. And so when they do that, of course, that means that more and more weapons have to be paid for by U.S. tax dollars. So I have a real problem with this. I think that the executive branch should not be able to, it should not be able to fund, weapons supplies to other countries without congressional approval through a vote. And unfortunately, there have been some votes, and this is one of those areas where I really was very disappointed, I guess, with Mike Johnson, and why did they go there? Why did they fund another amount of money into the Ukraine? It makes no sense at all. So this is an area where I think we as citizens need to be reaching out to our our members of Congress and to their offices and asking them, why are we continuing to spend money on this war? We need to get away from this. Hopefully, Trump is going to get in there and change things, because I definitely think the American people are war weary of this war in the Ukraine, and they are, of course, now including you've got you have uh, you've got American troops, whether we want to admit it or not, that are basically being, sent there. And while they may not be directly engaged, they're providing advice, doing training on these weapons that we're sending. I cannot see any upside to this in the end for America. And now you've got, of course, in the midst of all of this, you have the the U.S. government talking about the Biden administration talking about how we need to create a new draft that would include drafting our daughters to go to war. No, thank you. I am not interested in that, not one bit. So I'm really disappointed, I guess, in NATO, and honestly, I'm at the point now where what is the point of NATO? NATO was the North American Treaty Organization. It was really came about as a result of the Cold War. The Cold War is over, and why do we have this treaty anymore? It only costs us money. I'd like to see a lot of these globalist organizations go away, including NATO. I don't see the point of it anymore, especially if they're going to continue to propagate proxy wars. Now instead of it being the Middle East, although we are still involved in proxy wars in the Middle East. For example, Yemen, and you've got that's a proxy war, between the U.S. and Iran being fought there in Yemen. So there's a lot going on in the world, and to me, the more open and honest, and I think declarations of war need to be made by Congress, not by presidents deciding that they're going to engage themselves into some conflict, and it's okay for him to do it just because he calls it a conflict instead of a war. I'm sorry, the moment that we drop one missile or one bomb, it is a war, and it should be declared by Congress, not by the president. On the cybersecurity front, there's some interesting things that have been happening. Obviously, as Crystal, you had mentioned on here, the comment here that not a surprise that CrowdStrike was to blame for the recent Microsoft outages. DNS services impacted as well as flights and everything in between. So I want to talk about this for a little bit. I had some personal experience with this. I work for a federal agency. I'm not going to say which one, but I do have a contract, and I will tell you that federal agency, which plays a very important role, was completely shut down. I mean, we could not operate. Some of the servers and stuff were up, but the fact is that because this thing came on a Friday, that meant that people went home and nothing got fixed over the weekend, and so things were basically down over the weekend as well. And so there are things that run over the weekend, like vulnerability scans, things like that, could not happen. In some cases, you had. In my case, I was waiting on with a tech call for 4 hours on Friday, and then I finally gave up and said, "Hey, call me back when you guys are ready to help me out." And didn't get a call. Monday morning rolled around. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And so I decided at that point that I wanted to, call them, and I was going to wait however long it took. I think it took 5 hours, and I finally got a hold of the tech department, and they helped me, get what I needed in order to, get my system back up. But here's the problem. This is why it was a very minor software push that caused this whole problem. Basically, it was one driver file that CrowdStrike pushed out, and that driver file would prevent you from being able to log in. And it was funny. My wife, she's definitely not a very computer savvy person. She will admit that she's a little bit on the tech-tarded side, but she saw me having to reboot the advice that was given by CrowdStrike was reboot your system, 12, 15 times, and that might fix it. That's just a delay tactic. Honestly, I rebooted my computer probably 20, 30 times while I was waiting on the phone, to speak to somebody. And of course, it didn't do any good at all. And my wife was seeing this, and she goes, "Hey, is this what they were talking about? With the Great Reset?" Because I kept having to reset my computer. So, but all joking aside, the truth is why this was so dangerous and why this actually brought down so much is we have learned nothing from the SolarWinds hack, a while back, a couple years ago, where basically we had this trusted piece of software that was in all of our systems in the government, used for managing logs and things like that. And but it turned out that the Chinese had a backdoor, to get into our systems through that. In this case, it wasn't so much data exfiltration that was going on through CrowdStrike's trusted software, because we had this agent running on all of our computers. But the issue was that we've locked down our computers so much so that when something can affect your computer from even being able to boot up, then you've got a problem, because in order to get into the BIOS, to get in at the very rudimentary level, or to log in safe mode, most of these government computers are locked down with BitLocker. And in my case, that's exactly what happened. I couldn't get in because I didn't have the BitLocker key. And the only people that had that were certain administrators and in the tech department. Even though I'm a systems administrator, I'm not a systems administrator on my own machine. I'm a systems administrator for some servers. So that became a problem, because basically there were hundreds of thousands of employees and contractors that they had to reach out to and contact one at a time to give them their activation key for BitLocker so they could log in safe mode and remove that file. I mean, this is literally the process that had happened for hundreds of thousands of people. And I imagine that, places like airlines, anywhere that is, considered national critical infrastructure, they are required to adhere to what they call FISMA standards. And that is the Federal Information System Security Modernization Act, or Management Act. It used to be, and then they changed it to Modernization Act. But that basically requires certain security protocols to be in place for anything that's considered a national security system, or anything that is considered national critical infrastructure. So even some privately owned companies that deal with like transportation, or maybe water treatment or power plants, things like that. Those are absolutely impacted because they've implemented these security features, like making sure that you have encryption for data at rest. So in this case, almost every employee has been issued a laptop. That is how they log on. Nobody uses a workstation anymore. They all have laptops. And because those laptops can be taken, and because most of us since COVID are now working from home, or sometimes working from home, sometimes working out of the office, they have data at rest encryption on those hard drives, so you cannot get in. So what I look at at this situation, and why it's so dangerous, is because no one foresaw this kind of problem. CrowdStrike, of course, came out and they said, "Oh, this isn't a cyber attack, and it's not a cyber incident. This is just a bad piece of software got pushed out." I beg to differ. It may not have been a cyber attack, which would indicate that it was intentional by CrowdStrike. I can't see why anybody would want this to happen, because they lost 30% of the value of their stock within 24 hours. But this was absolutely a cyber incident, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it was the largest distributed denial of service attack ever in history. It brought down computers all around the world, and governments all around the world. Probably the only reason why our enemies didn't take more advantage of this is because I think they were dealing with the same problem too. We know that some of our allies were. You had New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Canada. All the Five Eyes were certainly affected. But anybody using these tool sets overseas would have been affected as well. And so this was a real problem. And why did we not know this? Why did we? And more importantly, why did this company allow for this software to be pushed out without testing it? Because the way that software development lifecycle happens is you have software that goes through a life cycle where they test that software patch on every Windows version, every Linux version, every operating system that it can be installed on, and they test it to see if it breaks anything. They do this in their development, what they call DevSecOps, before they ever push out this software to the production environment. So how did this get pushed out? Was this an employee that was disgruntled that decided to do this? Was this in maybe somebody that was negligent and pushed the wrong button or didn't do something, or was lazy and didn't test it properly? Whatever the case is, you can be assured, and we will find out, but you can be assured there's probably going to be multiple lawsuits against CrowdStrike for this. I'll give you an example. There were people who were in hospitals where hospital systems were taken down. Did anybody die as a result of this? Were surgeries not able to be performed because of this? You had people, airline industries that were shut down to such a great extent that we haven't seen anything like this since 9/11, where you had multiple planes grounded all around the country or all around the world. You had other things that I thought were pretty significant that could lead to major lawsuits was there were multiple trading platforms that were shut down. So if you had stock that you were in the midst of trading, you're a day trader, time is money, and your ability to be able to trade and be able to get rid of stocks, including CrowdStrike, you couldn't even sell your CrowdStrike stock because of what was going on. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. I don't think the story's over. And to be honest with you, if we don't have those conversations in a very public way, if Congress doesn't subpoena these people from CrowdStrike and demand questions, then unfortunately nothing will change. But it can't just be about questioning them, to get, basically to get a lot of attention in Congress. I'm sick and tired of that. What they need to do is they need to say, okay, we need an after action review. We need to find out, how did this happen? Number one, there is culpability and responsibility by CrowdStrike. But also on the other end, why does the government allow for an agent to have direct capability of pushing software to its computers without testing it itself in its own test environment? So maybe they don't want to test every patch because that could take a long time and it's time consuming and extremely costly. But maybe they should do it for high value computers, right? Systems that are extremely important. This kind of testing protocol needs to be done. So sorry for going so much into that, but it is an area where I have a lot of background and expertise. And so I'm bound to kind of talk about those issues more. There is and I want you guys to think about this. This affected any system that had the CrowdStrike agent that was running on Windows 11. So in this case, all of those broke down, old Windows 10 computers that or Windows 7 or Windows XP that shouldn't exist because they're out of service and they're not even being patched anymore. Those systems weren't affected. So why were there not more systems affected? Because a lot of the systems that should be upgraded to Windows 11 have not been. And so I think about things like our election systems, which most of them operate off of Windows operating systems. I think about things like our water treatment plants, our point of sales terminals at stores. There's a lot of things that utilize Windows, and you'd be surprised. Medical equipment. And so if it was not Windows 11 and it didn't have that agent, then it was not impacted. But that is a pretty serious thing. Why was there not more? And that's probably because you got a lot of stuff that, and this has been my experience when I was with Mar4 Cyber. I was on the cyber protection team. And what we found was that most of our national critical infrastructure was behind in its patches and in its upgrades and maintenance. And so it was very bad. Um, one of the things that I want to talk about for a minute is AI. And I don't like the term artificial intelligence. It sounds cool, but there really is no such thing. You don't really have true artificial intelligence where systems are autonomous and thinking for themselves, and there's still programming, there's still data tagging that's involved, and so, but AI is an amazing thing, and I prefer the term augmented intelligence. Augmented meaning because our brains. I'll give you an example. We can only think of and only do so much. Our brain can only compute so much, and what AI allows is it allows for massive computing power to be able to figure things out and really make our lives easier. In the area of cyber defense, I do believe that AI is going to be critical because when you're looking at cyber warfare, and you have an attack going on against a company or against national critical infrastructure, there's so many attacks that happen. It's literally impossible to deal with them all. And so the hardest part of being on a cyber defensive operations team is you've got to decide what is most important to defend against, what is most important systems that you need to protect, and if I can't patch everything and I can't deal with everything, what can I do to minimize the threat risk on most stuff, but then hone in on the things that are most important. And AI has a great capability of being able to help with that. And I call it cyber triage. That's my term. But what it means is basically think about that scene, Saving Private Ryan, where, they just landed on Omaha Beach and, everybody's getting blown to hell and they're running across the sand just to get the hell off that beach. And the medic is going around and he's looking at all of these critical injuries. Guy's got his guts blown out and he's definitely going to die. And there's nothing that they're going to be able to do to save this guy. And so for that guy, he gives him morphine just so he doesn't have to feel the pain. Then he goes down and sees another guy and he's got a bullet wound. And so he puts a compress on it and focuses his attention to trying to save that guy because he's likely going to, live. Another guy, he might put a tourniquet on, because he got his arm blown off. That guy might live. So, but he has to make a decision as to who he's going to spend time fixing and working on. And in this world of cyber defensive operations, you got to do the same thing. You can't possibly address every single attack. And I'll give you an example. Now, this was several years ago, and I don't work in this field now, but at the time, I was working in cyber defensive operations, and I literally would see, and this is probably about 10 years ago, I was seeing, like, say, 25,000 attacks a day against this naval system that I managed. And those are 25,000 attacks just from China. It did not include the almost 20,000 attacks that came from France, or that came from Canada, or that came from a whole host of other countries around the world. Because most hackers don't, especially if a nation state, they don't want to. If I'm going to go, if I'm working for the the American government, let's say, and I'm going to go and attack one of our enemies, do you really think I'm going to launch that attack from an IP address that's here in the United States? Of course not. So our enemies don't do that either. And so they basically jump to, a system in a foreign country that might be an ally with us. And they'll launch their attack from there. And, they'll find a compromised system, take it over. And then, that we call that hopping. And so that's the way that cyber warfare oftentimes works. So what AI does is AI is critically important for helping us to be able to keep up with all of these attacks that are going on. China has way more cyber warfare teams than we do. I mean, they outnumber us, probably. Well, I'll be careful. I'll just say they outnumber us a lot. I'll just leave it at that. And the fact is that the only way that we can deal with that, because it's a lot easier to hack somebody than it is to defend against being hacked. It's not like in the movies where, somebody's on the keyboard and they're typing up and they're like, oh, I'm in. It doesn't work that way. Usually a cyber attack is planned out. It goes on for weeks, sometimes months, and they basically work their way into the system. They try to exploit every possible exploit. They'll scan, look for vulnerabilities, try to exploit all those vulnerabilities. And the way that it works is they can sit there and knock on a door all day long until finally it opens. But it will be 10,000 of them knocking on doors. Okay. So if you're the defender, you're not just dealing with one door, you're dealing with thousands of doors, because every port is a door. Every port or protocol is a door. Every connection going out into the worldwide web is a door. And so you have to watch and monitor all that and try to make sense of it all and figure it out. And oftentimes these systems are not tuned properly, so there might be a lot of false positives, and that makes it even more difficult, because now you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, or trying to find a hacker in a lot of noise. And some hacks are even designed to be that way on purpose. So AI really is going to be, I think, the next big thing for cyber defensive operations, and basically helping not just our country, but other countries to learn, to basically be able to defend against these types of hacks and be able to see things like polymorphic code. Many of you probably have antivirus on your computer. I do not. The reason I don't is because I see it as worthless. 90% of all attacks are not even in, or could not even be identified by your average, antivirus scanner. And the reason for that is because they're using AI to develop new attacks. And so they're doing stuff like polymorphic code, which makes slight changes to the code automatically. And that way it can get around, vulnerability scanners, or not vulnerability, but virus and malware scanners. You can't even see it. And so, and if it's a nation state, they're most certainly doing that. And so, but years ago, I had something that really surprised me. You guys may have heard of a company called Avast, which was had free antivirus software, which was pretty good, or at least it was rated as good. Well, I had this running on my systems, and at the time I had a Mac system that seemed like I was just looking at my network, and I noticed there was a lot of information going out from my Mac. And I'm like, nobody's even been on the Mac. I only used it for, some video editing and things like that. And so I decided to put a packet sniffer called Wireshark on my network, and to monitor what was coming out of there and what was all the data that was leaving my computer, because I thought maybe somebody hacked into my computer. Well, you know what it was? It was Avast. It was a Avast agent that was running on my computer, and it was sending tons and tons of data, analytics data, and probably even keystrokes and things that I'm, places I'm going to, websites I'm visiting, sending all this information back to Avast. So I immediately deleted it, removed it out of my computer, removed it off all my computers, said, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I know how to look for vulnerabilities in my own system and identify compromise in my own system on my own. I'm trained in that. And so why do I need the software that's going to possibly be stealing other information? Well, then it came out that Avast had actually been, digging into people's personal files and stuff without their knowledge. This happened, came out many years later. But again, it was another case, just like CrowdStrike, of where you had a Trojan horse. You had a trusted piece of software on your computer, and it was able to basically gather information and send it back out to them so that they could sell it, for marketing purposes. AI plays an important role in prediction. There's predictive models that they're using it for now to identify, where the trends are going in terms of hacking. They can manage, it can look at a ton of data and say, okay, we can see that, hackers are going to be, this is going to be the next greatest thing that they're going to start, utilizing. I'll give you one example where I saw AI being used in a very rudimentary way, but it was years ago. We when we think about the Department of Defense and the military, anytime you hear the term, "Oh, we're going to hook up, our military weapon systems to AI," that immediately scares people because we all grew up, watching the Terminator and seeing what happened when they turned on Skynet. Here's the problem, though. There is AI. There's two different modes for it. There's training mode, and training mode is when AI is learning and it modifying itself because it's in that learning mode. You don't ever want to have something that's in training mode necessarily, embedded with our military weapon systems, but something that is in the not where learning mode is turned off, and they basically have used it to identify, better algorithms for, let's say, targeting. Okay, you might use AI as a means of, say, we're going to drop a bomb. We want to take out the right corner of this building, but we don't want to kill all the civilians that, we only need to take out that one building, that one spot. AI can help with that. It can help to identify, to minimize collateral damage in wartime. It can help for, autonomous drones and things like that to be able to bring them back if they lose their signal connection. And there's all kinds of ways that AI is being implemented right now as we speak in our military. And it is a good thing. And I'll tell you why, because our enemies are doing it too. And if we don't keep up with it, if we don't have the best AI developers in the world, it will definitely put us at major risk. So we have to. It's kind of like nuclear bombs, right? You don't want ever there to be a nuclear war, but you better be sure that you have a nuclear deterrent and that your nuclear deterrent is better than anybody else's. This conversation actually I was talking to a whistleblower who, and I'll probably get him on the show here sometime in the near future. But this guy works for Department of Homeland Security, and we were talking about the gain of function testing, and which I am totally against, and bioweapons labs that are all over the place, like in the Ukraine. And I was talking about it, and I realized, the tendency is for us to be idealistic and throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what are our enemies doing? Are they developing? I mean, obviously China, they're doing it. So if we're not doing, our own development that is keeping up with our enemies, we are putting ourselves at risk. So I do think that there has to be, we got to find balance in this somehow. I do think we need an ethics board or an ethics commission that will identify, okay, what are the things we're going to allow AI to do? What are the things that we see no benefit for? In fact, we see a destructive capability of AI. We need to have that. We had that early on in the bioengineering fields. That's why when they figured out how to clone Dolly the sheep, the bioethics association, I think is what they were. They basically came out and said, we are all agreeing that we're not going to allow, we're going to recommend that Congress, pass laws that say you cannot clone human beings. And so, certain things were decided on the basis of ethics, that they didn't want to go down this road of cloning. And I think that's important. We got to do the same thing with AI. We got to do the same thing with all kinds of technological advances that we make that could have applications that can be great or applications that are terrible. People oftentimes, they look at Hollywood and they see all the plastic surgery and, all the body modification and everything. And they're like, why did we ever allow this to become a thing? Well, again, there was a very practical, good, and solid case for the development of plastic surgery techniques that came out of World War II. You had guys coming back from the war that had half their face blown off. And so actually Walter Reed in Washington, or in Maryland, they were doing a lot of research into plastic surgery in order to help soldiers be able to have some semblance of normalcy in their life. But of course, there was no, we had no ethics boards that said, hey, we think it's a bad thing if people just start, having plastic surgery procedures to, change, the way they look. We see this happen now with transgender surgeries. Maybe they say, oh, we're going to let adults do this because they're adults and, they should be able to do whatever they want. But, there seems to be no one that gives a damn about children and how it impacts them if they go and have these surgeries. There does not seem to be, there's no ethics board that says we're going to stop this, we're going to prevent this because this is not good for society. So I do see like AI and, any kind of new technology, we have to look at things from the perspective of ethics. That's very important. And in the area of cyber defense, we have to implement AI. We absolutely have to, or we will fall behind and we will become, subject to those who attack us. And we need to find a way to do better because right now we are very behind the curve with all of our national critical infrastructure. It's in pretty bad shape. There's some other issues that are going on. I'm going to pass through some of the economic stuff just because we're running out of time. I talked too much about cyber and AI, but I just thought it was important to get into that topic a little bit. So I'm going to skip some of the stuff going on with India's industrial production or Central Europe's growth. I don't know if it's that interesting to most people, but there are two scientific breakthroughs that happened recently that I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about because of all of the election stuff. But these are important. One was a discovery made by the James Webb Telescope. There are new findings from that telescope. This is the space telescope that is able to see farther into the universe than anything else with clarity, and it's provided insights into early universe and identifying previously unknown galaxies and cosmic phenomenon. So folks, dig into that. Look into these things. It's kind of an interesting topic. It's fascinating to me because there was a big story that was up on NASA about this, and they have since taken it down. And when you go and try to dig into it, it's, I don't know if they moved the page or what, but it's definitely worth looking into. There's a lot. I have a friend, and I'm going to have him on at some point in the future, but he is working on a thesis to prove that dark matter does not exist. And he has literally mapped out all of the known universe that we know about, and he's got massive amounts of data that he's running through all of these very complex math equations that I don't understand. But I told him, I said, I want to have you on to talk about this, but you're gonna have to dumb it down like big time. so that's something very interesting that's going on. But also another thing, and this gets it back into the ethics thing, is CRISPR. So for those of you that aren't familiar with CRISPR is a piece of software that allows you to do what they call gene editing. Some of the ways that they've used it is they created a goat that instead of producing milk, it produces, they basically added some spider genes, and it produces spider silk out of its udder, which is questionable as to whether or not that is, ethical or not. But at least it's not a human being that they're modifying. They've also used it to modify some other things that are maybe a little less, creepy. They created a rabbit that glows in the dark because it has phosphorescent genes. They created, some other things that one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting was they made a beer that was phosphorescent that you could drink. And so I don't know if it was the hops, I think, that had phosphorescence in them, but apparently you could drink and it wouldn't harm you, but you could have a glow in the dark beer, which is kind of interesting, kind of cool. But as we know from genetic modification, when they started doing GMO stuff with corn, there were people who had terrible reactions to GMOs, and they died because of it. And so there's a lot of people that don't want to see any of this kind of technology being used. We've seen the gene editing going on with mRNA vaccines, which I think are terrible. But again, sometimes things start off with good purposes, noble purposes, like how plastic surgery started off to fix people who had disabling problems. War veterans that were completely disfigured. It started off with a noble purpose, and now you got everything from transgender surgery on children to people getting butt implants because they have low self-esteem and they don't like their own body. In the other hand, you have sometimes technology that starts for purposes that really aren't good, but it can evolve into something that can be used in a very positive way. And there's a story about CRISPR technology where they've had some successes recently in treating genetic disorders in lab animals. And it's paving the way for human trials and potential cures for genetic diseases. Now, again, I think there needs to be very careful. I think there needs to be very careful ethics surrounding this. I think that we need to think about what we're doing and what the possibility is that this could cause further problems, how it could be misused. But at the end of the day, I can't help but think about some people who are born with genetic disorders that are going to cost them their lives or cause them to live in pain, or cause them to have major health issues. And if there was a way, as a father, if I had a child that had one of those, kind of life-threatening genetic disorders, and there was a way to cure it, and safely by fixing that gene, I absolutely would be for that. So I do think that we need to continue to learn and progress and get better at these types of things. Just like with mRNA technology, I don't think it's good because of the methods that are used, especially with I don't think it's good for, COVID vaccines. And there's problems with when you start messing with the RNA to develop proteins and things like that the body recognizes as an invader in order to build. That's the principle behind mRNA technology. Is it basically inserts genes, it's gene editing. It inserts RNA to produce proteins that your body recognizes as foreign, so that it will hopefully develop an immunity, to this disease. And in the case of COVID, what they did was they said, okay, we're going to cause the body to create spike protein, which spike protein happens to be the most toxic substance of the COVID vaccine. It also, what they found was that by continuously exposing the body to this, is that it caused a problem with what they call IgG shift. So you had people's immune system essentially saying, oh, I'm used to seeing this, so I'm just going to ignore it from now on. Instead of actually creating an antibody, it stopped, noticing it. And so it creates problems with, it creates problems with the immune system, especially with all these booster shots. So does that mean that we should completely discard and throw away any thought of ever doing gene editing or any thought of ever, using mRNA technology? No, because there may be a useful purpose for it that is not harmful. But we have to, again, we got to continue to do these things in a way that requires a lot of safe testing. I think, I love Donald Trump, and I think Trump has been probably the greatest president of my lifetime. But I'm not without my criticisms. I think, and I try not to judge if you've never walked a mile in somebody's shoes, but I think that the rapid creation of the COVID vaccines, specifically the mRNA ones, I think was extremely dangerous, and I think it was a bad idea. I think there's a reason we have protocols And there's a reason why we go through years of animal testing and then, human testing before we release these things, to, for use. And I think we have to stick to those things for a reason. I'm all for, if you're going to die and you got no other option. Look, I'm all for somebody having the right to try. And that's one of the things I agreed with Trump. But I think the rapid development of some of these things, especially with drug companies that have so much power, it's a dangerous thing. We're almost out of time here. It's we are out of time. And but I want to thank you guys for joining tonight. Again, this was a little different than I normally do. I normally have a guest on, but I wanted to try this out. And I think, Saturday nights, I want to go through some of the stories that are out there and talk about these things and bring a different perspective to some of these stories, because anytime you read a news story, there's always an agenda. But I always like to look at it from a critical perspective and try to see, what are other things that we need to be thinking about when we see these types of stories. And so that hopefully you got some of that tonight. And but I always end my show in prayer. I think it's extremely important to recognize that we may want to see things change, and I certainly applaud those that are trying to bring change, those that are trying to do good. But I don't believe we can do it without God's help. I think we have to do our part, but I think we also need to put our faith and trust in God, and we need to ask for his assistance in these endeavors. So with that, Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you, God, for the opportunities for us to learn, to think critically, to get involved, and to take action. You say that faith without works is dead, and so we know we have a part to play. But we recognize, God, that we need your help. We recognize that we cannot do this alone, and that we need divine assistance from on high. And so, Lord, we pray for your providence. We pray for your wisdom, for both for us and for our nation's leaders. And we pray that you would cause them to think ethically about the things that are going on, and that they would put into place the proper protections and safeguards to prevent potentially good technologies from going the wrong direction or turning into bad things. We pray that you would restore the family, restore those concepts of tradition that have been, that have stood since time immemorial. Things like the family unit and the need for human communication and interaction, and humans making the decisions. Help us to keep things like AI in check, but as we learn and we develop it, help us to keep things like genetic engineering in check as we develop and learn how to fix things. And we ask for your assistance in all of this. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, with that, thank you for joining me, and God bless.
Raise some. Hey, hey, hey. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some cane.